AI isn't the future, it's the present slapping us awake. Yet 70% of digital transformation projects still belly flop. Why? Is it because we keep dragging dusty linear change management playbooks into a world that iterates at machine speed? Hello and welcome to TIDES. I'm Shveta Malhan, managing partner and co-founder at Yenza³. Today I'm joined by Lindsay Sinclair, change strategist, culture whisperer, and a fierce advocate for making transformation human first. Today, we will unpack why traditional change management methods struggle and often fail in the age of AI. If you're looking for ways to keep pace with technology and bring your people along for the ride, you're in the right place. So let's get started. Lindsay, welcome to TIDES.
Thank you. Absolutely happy to be here.
So, Lindsay, even before the AI tsunami that we are about to witness, some estimates say around 70% of digital transformation initiatives fall short of their objectives. So, when you look at that 70% failure rate, do you think it's primarily about outdated change management approaches, or are there deeper cultural hurdles we are missing?
I love that you're starting with this question. And I feel like there's a couple of ways into this. And so, do I feel like there's a deeper cultural issue at hand? Yes. But I also feel like some of these outdated practices that, as longstanding change managers, I think are tried and true. But I also think they don't really set us up for success in this new world of AI.
That is so true. So, if we look at the old playbooks and where we struggled the most with digital transformation, what do you think that didn't work in the past digital transformation efforts? I'm just trying to tease out where we went wrong in the past digital transformation efforts, and then we'll get into what do we do about the future that's coming our way.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that digital transformation, we were in a different landscape. So if we think about that as sort of 7 to 10 years ago, and even beyond that, it was things like we do this manually, and tomorrow we're going to have a system that's going to support us to do that. It wasn't necessarily about human factors beyond the workplace, where today we're faced with so many other implications of human elements, really. So the workplace is sort of blended into that personal side of things. And so I think there are things in this world we have to consider, like connectivity. And a connection to something is very human. It's very personal. So things like we're all familiar with the WIFM, what's in it for me. I think that stands true. It's just much more critical now than ever before, because people have really declared that they're out for, what's going to work for them, what's going to work for their family. And we learned a lot through pandemic, and we learned a lot post-pandemic on what's important to people. And so digital transformation, it was a little bit more, it was lighter. It was a different time, and people are valuing different things now.
Yeah, that is so true. And if I remember from my experience of the world of ERP days, like the team supporting change was tucked under IT. And when we were looking at supporting the change and adoption, it was, typically thought of at the tail end of any implementation, right? So, and then there were playbooks like ADCAR, and there's so many models and frameworks that we were using. Do you think that approach will work in today's time? And if not, why, in addition to the changing behavior and expectations of the employees?
Well, you know what? You have to start now, and it's not even just about AI. So businesses now have to connect people's strategy, right? So often I've seen that as separate. The business is going here and people's strategy is going here. And those two things are so obviously related. But I think in this new world, if we're super clear on where we're going as a company, and we understand what part people play in the organization, then we're much better equipped to have real conversations about roles, about upskilling, about how to leverage AI to be better and to allow us to do more meaningful work rather than always taking jobs away, right? This narrative has continued to come up around it just means displacement. but it also means really cool tools that we can all use to be successful in our roles today. So I do think that it's backing it up, coming into a project that potentially is bringing AI across the organization. Waiting until you want to talk to the organization about it is too late.
Yeah.
When you're building your AI strategy into your business strategy, that's the time for it. That's the time to start looking at people and what they need to be successful in that world.
And I also hear, like, I was just looking at a report that BCG rolled out in October last year, and they said that 70% of adoption is failing because this transformation is not looked at through the lens of people and processes. Previous transformations, like we talked about earlier, were very tech heavy transformations. Do you think companies should see this as a tech transformation, or should it be seen as tech and something else? I know everybody's jumping on it from a tech perspective first.
Well, I think that's the difference between transformation and revolution, really, right? Like we're embarking on a completely different way of working and living. And it, so this is why practices need to change, because when I think about myself in the AI world, I think I am not just faced with this when I enter the doors of a client. I'm faced with this when I talk to my children about schoolwork, when I am researching something on my own, or if I'm helping a parent navigate this change as well, right? So what hasn't changed, in my humble opinion, is talking to somebody about what it means to them. So there's different fears, right? Because it's not just, am I relevant in the workplace? It's, am I relevant altogether? You know, and so having children is probably the best experiment, because they'll tell you if you're irrelevant or not, especially in this space, right? So I think that this is what's changed, is when we think about an organization adopting AI, thinking about who their people are, what's important to them, how do they look at their work,
Mhm.
right? And some people have a lot of pride and integrity around being the person to enter data, being the person to mine the data. And so, when AI is such a helpful tool now, how do we help them feel that they are still relevant because they have critical thinking and
Mhm.
they have the ability to leverage AI, right, to get to a better place sooner?
Mhm.
So it requires conversation. And I think it requires dedicating time and investment to that. And I think speed is a factor, right? So the speed of AI, it's coming at us, it's changing all the time. And so how do we sort of catch up to that with how we're bringing people along? Because people change at their own pace.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you made a really good point early on that the organizations should think about people right at the get go, not when choices and decisions have been made. So, what does that look like? Like, if an organization is thinking about integrating AI into their organization, how do they start bringing in that people lens upfront to support their choices and decisions?
Well, so this is where I think it's a blend of sort of traditional tactics and new tactics. If I think about, looking at an organizational structure as an example, and you look at people in their roles and you're looking at succession planning, or you're looking at, where they fit into the organization, there's often a question of, where do you see somebody going in their career? Where do you see somebody on that path? And what are the tools and mentorship that you're going to give that person in that path? So that's something we would do in performance management and people and culture strategy. And so when it comes to AI, it's a layer of that. It's a layer of saying, okay, if this is AI, how is that changing the roles in our organization? So knowing where we want to utilize it and why we want to utilize it that way, then looking at who is going to need to interact with it and having the same kinds of conversations, right? What does this person need? Do they have that skill? Do they, some people will excel because it's natural to them. Some people will need a lot of support. So it is really getting down to the individual,
Yeah.
um, and planning for a support model so that nobody's left behind.
Yeah. And if an organization has to have that level of information, that means they're data plays a huge role in this equation, especially people data, if we have to tailor our change practices at an individual level.
It's so true. And at all sizes of organizations, right? So I've worked with organizations that are like 20 to 40 people all the way up to 5,000 people organizations. The difference is the amount of data you have available to you. And I would say the cleanliness of the data, right? So I, I feel like, smaller organizations are still met with the same challenges. And so being able to harness who your people are, what they care about, what their skills are, what they want to do versus what they don't want to do. There's a more one-on-one aspect to it because it's fewer people. But leadership in a larger organization can be the pass or fail. So, if a leader understands their people and the data that's being presented to them, then they can make better decisions. But, something that keeps me up a little bit about leaders is that we've got to take care of our leaders too.
Mm-hmm.
So if we start with leaders on their capability and their ability to bring people through change, then I think we can be more successful.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I do find that sometimes we just assume that our leaders will be able to lead that change. And so they're going to also need a level of support that perhaps we haven't given them before.
Yeah. So let's get to the leadership conversation because it's a very important point that you make. But I wanted to first double down on the data side of things and compare and contrast just the data element with respect to how it was used in traditional change approaches versus what can we be doing differently. Because to your point, there's no new playbook for this change and transformation. We're all in experimental phase. I
Yes.
wanted to jam with you on like if we have to look at data differently, what would it look like? But let's first talk about how has data been used in past change practices or playbooks and what type of human data was being used.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it depended on the transformation, but overall, I think we understand that you assess the change, right? You look at what's changing, you look at who that's impacting, and then you go through those roles and how it's impacted, right? That's a set of data that I think has been used over and over again to say, how do you need to manage this change? But does it get to the right level? Is the question, right? So we sort of have the categories of change around, we know external factors, internal factors. And I think there's this whole other element of how do you incorporate somebody's outside the workplace type of change that's happening to them. And that needs to be incorporated into the data. So today you're going to rely, or let's say in recent history, you're relying on HRIS systems, and then you're relying on the correctness of your assessment
Yeah, yeah.
that you were able to gather.
That's right. So in traditional change approaches, you'll have people assigned for change management. They will go interview, they'll go to multiple sources, collect all the data around people, the org charts, who sits where in the organization, who reports to who's, and then of course interviews and focus groups and things like that. But that might not work in today's context because it's a long drawn process.
Mhm.
So in today's context, to your point, we have HRIS systems. Companies might have a rich people analytics practice where they might have micro data around employees, such as what skills does an employee have, or how long have they been with the organization, or what's the span of control for different leaders. So there's so much data around an employee in an organization. And this is all active data, like explicit data, which you have structured and stored in a system in one place that you can extract quickly. But then we live in a digital age. I mean, one good thing about us all having gone through digital transformation is that whether an organization wants it or not, they have tons of employee footprint data in their organization that can be leveraged and mined to support quicker, effective decision making, like skills landscape data, for example, which is not passive data, which is active data. If like, even if we pull all the resumes of our employees from LinkedIn, run them through AI and say, can you parse the skills based on job titles? That information alone is so powerful for us to anticipate future changes in the organization, because the future change might not be I'm going to implement Microsoft Copilot in one part of the organization. The future change could be this capability in the organization is no longer required. So where do we remobilize people from this department to another department? Or it could be as macro as let's restructure the complete organization. So when you have powerful data about people, you can make more effective choices and decisions, which is in a way, which is very beneficial for us today if we have that data at our fingertips.
Well, and the data is powerful there, and there's a number of people that would benefit from understanding how AI can bring that data to light, right? So often people will be skeptical of change or fear change. And so the minute they see usefulness or value, what they value in it, then that's half the battle. They're already there, and then they just need your support to figure out how it impacts them. And so I think that what you're really getting at here is that the data that we use can really inform all of these strategies when it comes to how you manage the change. And I think it can be beyond workplace data as well, because there is so much that we're learning about, what are people looking for? What are they concerned about? Like I find it fascinating, and this is like just scratches the surface, but like even when you look at what are the top 3 searches that people are looking for between Canada and the US, you always have an interesting outcome of that, depending on the day, right? So I do believe that the data that we have today and the accessibility of it is leaps and bounds to what we had before to be able to help make those decisions.
Yeah. All right. So we spoke about including people early in the change journey. We spoke about data as a new key pillar of the change playbook. So if organizations who are not investing in data should start doubling down on figuring out their data strategy and data around people, that strategy quickly, because this is not a change where we have a defined state yet. To your point, we are still in an evolution mode. Things are changing by the day. So the sooner we lift up our data practice, the better it's going to be. So the third thing that we can talk about is the leadership angle. What's the impact of AI and the magnitude of change that we are witnessing today on the leadership landscape of an organization?
Yeah, I think that this is it. I think there's a big impact from 2 different lenses here. One of them is how we lead people through change. Of course, there's just this different magnitude of change at play. And so through that lens, I think what's changed for leaders is that they need to be having a lot more conversation, a lot more present, a lot more visible. Right. So the days of leading at an arm's length are sort of done, right? And understanding who your team is and how they operate on a different level than before is really what's at play there for them. But then also the other side of it is leaders have the same fears and questions and otherwise as everybody else. And so, wondering how AI impacts their job. Right. So I hear the gamut of it enables me to be better to why would I use AI? That means it's not my work. Right. So there's just this whole gamut of how people feel about the value it brings to their role and their job. And as leaders, the human touch, the big strategic thinking, what do you do with the result of all this data and all this, all the information that AI brings to light? That's where leadership thrives in this new world. And so, I think equipping leaders, getting in front of that so that they are actually the ones leading their teams through this change. But you got to start with how does this impact them? What are the tools that they have at their fingertips to be successful? And how can they lead the way? Right. So you got to have that locked in before you can have the expectation that they're just going to naturally lead your team through this
Yeah,
transformation.
that is so true. And I'm just curious to know from your perspective, because of Gen AI and the world that we are getting into, are organizations valuing different leadership traits and characteristics now than before? Has that shifted for organizations? I'm just trying to understand what worked from a leadership capability perspective pre-Gen AI, does it still work in today's context, or should leaders be thinking about things differently as they are trying to navigate these uncertain waters of the future?
Yeah, I think it's all about integration. It's integrated change leadership because, a change manager is such a critical role, but without everybody leading the change, we can't be successful with the AI disruption that we're facing. So, I think that as we move forward and as we think about where we're headed from a leadership perspective through the lens of AI, we really have to be thinking about, what's important and to everybody that they're leading. But I do believe what was different before is that the change it was a smaller scale. And I don't want to dismiss some of these digital transformations and some of the other, transformations that have existed. Certainly they were large, but this is just all encompassing. And so it just brings a different level of expectations for leaders at the table.
That is so true. Like if we take a hypothetical example of medium-sized organization going through some form of digital transformation, let's say they're implementing salesforce.com, the role of a leader in that situation would be working with the change person to understand the impact of salesforce.com in like 3 or 4 or 5 different role categories in their team. And the change person would draft out the right communication, and then the cascade of communications would go down, and the leaders will be at arm's length and say, yes, we support you, go through this training program. And I'm simplifying it to a great degree, but broadly speaking, that was the role of a leader in that transformation. Whereas today, you already flagged a really important behavior that a leader needs to exhibit, which is showing to the rest of the team that I'm also using AI. This is what worked for me. This is what didn't work for me, to build that openness to change for the rest of the team, because there's no one way of how AI is going to impact a set of people, even though they are doing the same job. So it's going to be such a wide variety of flavors in which AI is going to impact people, that the first thing that a leader needs to do is diffuse the fear by showing to their people that, yes, I'm in it with you.
Yeah, and I think there's been a couple pendulum swings too, right? So during the pandemic, we had a pendulum swing, rightfully so, to very human-centered leadership, caring for people, caring for their families, learning way more about them because we were all like this, right? So kids were in the background and all the rest of it. And so the pendulum swing to human was a great, great set of learning, right? So there was so much learning and how do I connect on a human level? And then we had another pendulum swing after pandemic that was how do we create culture in the absence of being in the office, right? So there's been a huge resurgence of people coming back to the office to create connectivity. And so that's still about human element, but then there's also been a lot of uncertainty in business these days. And so a lot of bottom line driving, financials, driving outcomes, driving, very almost prescriptive, right? This is what we're doing. This is how we need to do it, and let's get it done quickly, right? So that's another pendulum swing, and I think we need to land somewhere in the middle when it comes to AI because we can't slow down. We'll miss the boat if we slow down, but we can't leave the people behind because you AI will not fully replace people. And I know I might be alone in thinking that maybe, but I just do think that if we don't keep a semblance of the humanity we got out of some previous years, that percentage on where we're successful or not could continue to go down
Yeah.
if people just don't feel supported and cared for throughout the change.
Yeah. Yeah. But do you think there is a transition phase that we will encounter, because this change doesn't have an end state defined yet, where, let's say, for example, a department had 10 people. Now, with AI being rolled out, they can get the same amount of work done with 2 people, because AI is doing the heavy load of, like black and white tasks that don't add value from a human's perspective. And yes, there would be new work that's created, but that organizations would have to put time to figure out Now that we have kind of taken care of all that was black and white and embedded machines, what new work is emerging? So there would be a phase in between where some people will end up losing their jobs for some time till they're reskilled to move into new jobs that would be created that we don't know of yet.
Mm. Yeah, like what is the career that we just haven't heard of yet?
Yeah.
Because right. And I think that this is where I sort of nerd out on future of work topics, because I think as we paint a picture of the future in organizations on what capabilities are going to be required from a leadership perspective, it's certainly centering in on the human aspect of leadership, um, and certainly strategy, like creating the future of the organization. But it will be about people. And then when you look at, jobs within an organization and what capabilities are going to be required in the future, when some of these repeatable processes, automation will take over some of these, um, different types of roles that's easy to do with, where does it leave those people? And so I don't want to oversimplify, but it does come down to the path that we create. So as an organization, are we aligned to find the path for our people? And if the path maybe isn't even in our organization, where is the path to what's next? Right. So I'm a firm believer that, you don't necessarily have to stay in the organization to feel cared for by the organization, right? So there's a way to transition people that, there's thoughtfulness, that you're including them in the conversation. Um, and if we think people don't know it's there, right? So people know which of their skills can be automated. Um, and and a lot of people won't talk about that because of the fear of what does that mean, right, for my job. But imagine a world where they're included in that conversation, right? And sometimes there's hidden talents too that we don't even know about. And I find that all the time just by having conversations with people about things that interest them. And all of a sudden you find out that somebody's like an armchair coder, or something else where they would have high value in other parts of the organization, or again transitioning elsewhere but with support.
Yeah, absolutely. The speed, the size, the scope, the scale of this change is totally unprecedented. We haven't seen this before. So, if we know that this is different, would the traditional big bang rollout approaches work in this modern context? If not, then how should the organization be thinking about rolling out AI in their organizations differently this time around?
The more that we embrace the smaller change pieces and enabling people to play, to provide feedback, to iterate, the more they're going to be prepared for when whatever it is we're working on is done. And now, don't get me wrong, AI is never done. Like that's a different scenario, right? But I think what it does is it just enables us to put these things into bite-sized pieces. But it can also lead to fatigue, because there's how many things are happening in an organization at once. So I think we still owe it to our people to really have a line of sight to how many things are changing at once. And have we integrated the narrative? Is it all part of how somebody understands the future of the organization and how they're going to be able to participate? So it comes back to that human touch, the communication, transparency, and then these micro changes being proof points of progress and engagement.
And again, I'm just so curious. Every time you bring a perspective, I'm like, I need to talk about this. I do need to talk about change fatigue, but I also wanted to understand from your perspective, because I love the approach of micro experimentation. I think that can really be super helpful for organizations who do not have enough data about people at their fingertips to start identifying change champions. Because when you're doing micro experimentation in small pockets of the organization, you can quickly gauge who are the change ambassadors, early adopters, and leverage those change champions to build grassroots momentum around this change versus always relying on a top-down approach to facilitate change in an organization. Are there other benefits of micro experimentation before we get into change fatigue? Because I find that a very fascinating topic.
Well, I think there is. And I think the micro changes also allow other people that aren't early adopters to progress at their pace. Like we might be doing it quickly. There might be a 2-week sprint model in place, something like that. But the bite-sized pieces allow people that are a little more resistant, maybe through understanding or just their way of approaching change, right? It allows them to come along. And the early adopters, they help bring them along, right? But I think I love early adopters as change champions, and then I also love water cooler people. So this is the folks that if there's a problem, you're going to hear it at the water cooler, right? And those people are instrumental in managing change. And those micro elements are also very helpful for being able to ask those questions or, question, challenge, tell us what we don't know that we haven't thought about. And so you can pivot much more quickly than going with your big bang, waiting till you're there and communicating and then hearing all of that feedback.
That's so true. So let's talk about change fatigue as we get into the last segment of our conversation today. How did organization identify change fatigue pre-Gen AI era, and how can they monitor change fatigue in this era that we are living through right now? Are there any practices, tips, tricks that you could share with our audience?
Yeah, good question. So I think before change fatigue, and there's one model, a methodology that does this really well, which is, what is the concurrent changes at play? And so it's really a documentation of here's all the changes. And then you sort of get into more detail around, which roles, which people does this impact? And then you see where that person is inundated by more than one change. I think we have way better access to surprise, surprise data,
Yes.
which can help us indicate where there's fatigue as well. One thing that I continue to be fascinated about is how we work. And, we all have our own model of efficiency in how we do our work. And what's so compelling about the data we have access to now is that there's opportunities to see how people connect, right? So, I'm in Calgary, you're in Toronto, and here we are connected. And technology now can tell us the reach of people, right? And so this idea of fatigue, we can also highlight, who is the workload, who has an immense workload, who is not, it doesn't just have their day job, but they're also the connector of the organization. They're out there connecting people to their work, to change, to whatever it might be. And so, I hate to keep talking about data, but there is just so much more robust information to tell us where there's fatigue in an organization versus just looking at concurrent change.
Yeah, that is so true. Like most of us in organizations are either on Slack or Microsoft Teams.
Mm-hmm.
And without getting into reading the Slack messages, we can still look at timestamps. We can still look at who is messaging who, how often, to build that picture of connectivity and connective tissue in our organization. Emails is another good one, or even Slack messages or Microsoft Team messages. We can mine data like this particular team is having far greater exchanges beyond 5 p.m. So what's happening? At least it gives us an indicator, a signal to start our deeper investigation. So the power of data is immense in the context of where we are headed and what we need to solve for today.
Hmm. It's really going to underpin how, if we're successful or not, how we leverage the data that's at our fingertips.
Yeah. So as we wrap up our conversation today, Lindsay, what do you project for the future of change and AI adoption, and also organizations adapting with AI in next year or two?
Mm. Well, I think my prediction is that there's going to be several AI implementation programs. So I think that's the obvious prediction. In terms of how we manage change around it, my prediction is that it's actually going to become a conversation about risk. And so what is the risk of not doing it? What is the risk of not helping your people transition. And it becomes about the longevity of companies. I think we're about to redefine careers and career paths, and how people, sort of think about themselves in their career with depending on education, et cetera. So I think we have a few key disruptions ahead of us that are driven by AI. And I think that the change manager as a connector is going to become even more important. So getting out of process and into conversations and into aligning strategy across the organization.
So, for somebody who's responsible for change in an organization, and they might have a dedicated change responsibility, or it could be a leader who is proactive and wants to facilitate change in an organization, but is not getting buy-in from their leaders to get support for change management. What advice would you give to them so that they can position their ask in a way that they get the right people paying attention to what they're trying to achieve and what they're trying to solve for?
Mm, Okay, well, my advice is know your audience.
Hmm.
So when I say it, what I really mean by know your audience is understand your audience, right? So buy-in is really about what people value. And so this is why a pivot to talking about risk is really important because leadership teams really focus on mitigating risk, right? So if I was to meet with somebody who, perhaps it hasn't bought into the need for change when it comes to I think I'd have a conversation about what's important to them. So somewhere in what's important to them, I would say often what's going to come up is that um, the organization needs to do it. Like if we don't do it, we're irrelevant. So that's going to be important relevancy. Number two is retention. How do they keep their best people? And so it's all about how do we help people understand and create the buy-in around these tools we have at our fingertips to mitigate risk and help them be successful in their business strategy.
That's a really good point about positioning change differently for somebody who is internal in an organization and is trying to get buy-in from the stakeholders to facilitate and enable change in their organizational ecosystem. I'm also now thinking about people who are practitioners of change. They must be feeling like their lives have also been impacted by AI, because here we are sitting and talking about redefining an old change playbook to meet the needs, evolving needs of organization, and yet they have a tried and tested methodology at their fingertips. What should they be doing or thinking differently at this point to for them to stay relevant or for them to accomplish the mission of the organization?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the change practitioner today, and I've said it before already, that there's such a key part of this being successful. And what's changed is that one methodology is not one size fits all, right? So the adaptability of the practitioner and going back to knowing your audience and what do they care about and how do you describe it differently for people? Um, there's process, but then there's also stepping outside of the process, right? And really just thinking about, I have this toolkit and I have all this experience that I've had before, and now I'm working in this change space. And what's going to work that I can pull out of that toolkit right now? And what have I not tried? Because this is a different organization or different change, or, my tools are different. And it's being willing to embrace that so that
Yeah.
when you are talking about it and you are creating that buy-in, you're doing it through their lens, right?
Yeah.
And your playbook, by the way, it's it didn't go away. Those playbooks are still super important.
Mhm.
We just have to try to use them differently,
Yeah.
right? And bring that forward into this new world of AI.
It's like there's an art and science of how do we enable and facilitate and manage change in an organization. So, from a practitioner's perspective, the science hasn't gone away. The science hasn't changed. It's still people at the core of this change. There's still emotions involved. There's still fear involved. There's still, different people sitting at different change curve. But what I think is very exciting for change practitioner is to lean on the art of managing change or enabling change in an organization, which is quite exciting in a way because the toolkit hasn't gone away. To your point, it has just evolved, and we have more tools in our toolkit now to use to facilitate organizational change. And at the end of the day, it's not the process that matters, it's getting the outcome that the organization is looking for, right? Like the stakeholders
Hmm.
wouldn't care about whether we follow ADKAR or not. That's behind the scenes for us to go through, and we have
Oh,
to probably,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. There's nobody sitting on the other side of you going, you must follow ADKAR, right? They're thinking about their financial outcomes and their uh, strategic pillars that they've just presented to the board, and so they're
Yeah.
thinking of all sorts of things that can be enabled by this element of using a toolkit. And I think this is where I hope change practitioners are seeing a bright future,
Hmm.
because if anything, it makes that role more relevant. Having the art side of things, and being at the forefront of the change,
Hmm.
hopefully sooner than later. And being the expert in the room that can help people create ways to help organizations thrive in this new world of AI.
As a final question today, Lindsay, is there anything that you would like to talk about that we haven't been able to cover in our conversation today?
And we've covered so much ground. I think one thing that we probably didn't cover in a ton of detail is really communication. I think one of the things that can get in our way of building trust around AI is declaring wins too soon.
Mm.
That sort of humbleness around this will take time. We're on the journey together. Some of us are already there and some of us are nowhere close to it. Communication will go a long, long way in bringing that transparency to people and helping them feel like there's support for them in this whole AI realm that they're unfamiliar with.
Wow, Lindsay, what a power packed conversation. You've given us so much to rethink when it comes to leading change in an AI driven world. So, thank you so much for bringing such clarity and candor to the table.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with your favorite HR, people leader, or business leader who wants to make a difference in their organizational context. And as always, keep riding the tides of change with curiosity and courage. Until next time, take care.